Yeah.
Well, don't you look at, the scene with the woman who's nurturing the chicken? It's definitely challenging what you consider a norm. So it's a violation to probably many people in this room of what we consider a norm. So it's very abnormal. And then, the other thing that I saw in the film was the scene that you said just really gets your students going, is you see the conditions in which they're living and kind of the state of being that they're portrayed as. And you see them in this loving other place and how different that they can be and portray themselves. And then when you look at the correctional facilities and how inmates behave in this setting, as opposed to if they were in another condition, per se, or children in poverty, and seeing those messages come out. And I think what my colleague here was asking too, in a sense, is how do you take this message and educate, mobilize people to see those concepts and make real changes?
Yeah, well, the question obviously is bigger than this room.
Exactly.
But if we wanted to think about it, I think one of the things we would have to do is ask ourselves what kind of values are worth stabilizing and nurturing. So you notice the film comes to a conclusion with a fantasy about ideal motherhood, which is in a sense a fantasy about ideal nurture. And presumably that's a value that all of us bipeds would endorse, right? We come into the world dependent on the intimate bonds of family. I mean, we're the creatures that cannot survive on our own, at least till we're, 41, 42 years old, as opposed to other creatures in nature who are up on their feet and going to the supermarket within 3 hours of birth. Going to the watering hole, the little antelopes, for example, are not staying around reading the newspaper. They're often rats. They're up and moving. So from this point of view, I think you would say that, humanly speaking, nurture becomes an incredibly powerful shaper of identity as a species, but also individual identity. You could even make the argument that in some way, concentration camps and their equivalent penitentiaries are a marker for the collapse or failure of family, the failure of bonding with mother and child. There might be all kinds of complicating reasons for it. Life isn't simply a moral parable. There are people born, as it were, with organic deficiencies that make it very hard for them to relate to one another. You notice the amazing preoccupation in America these days with the concept of autism, which has come out of the shadows. 20, 30, 40 years ago, autism was a very rare and unusual and almost never publicly entertained concept. And now it's used almost like urban folklore. Every third person you run into is either knows someone who's autistic or, he might as well be autistic. It's become a metaphor for insensitivity and for our anxiety about the fraying of intimacy and bonding in a world in which everybody's communicating electronically.
That has a lot to do with the messaging that's going across.
Sure.
Out in the media, and you have a lot of people who have a certain mindset, and they're absorbing what they absorb and putting it back out.
Sure.
So,
no, I think that's quite right.
You look at the chicken, and what we normally think of the chicken is a stupid bird, and under the right conditions, the film shows how unique and wow, look what a chicken can do. We often as a society will look at homeless people a certain way. And not treat them humanely, but under the right conditions and environment, and you will see these beautiful flowers blossom. So
yeah, that strikes me as very astute, and also it opens up another dimension that we've been talking about all along, which is that it isn't just that the chickens become more interesting and more versatile and creative in their behavior. It's that our relation to the chicken improves as well. The chickens, you could say, begin to play or interplay with humans in a way that, in effect, makes life more interesting for everybody. And the same thing would be true with other kinds of folks who are afflicted by taboo. You know, whether it's fill in the blanks, whether it's homeless people or prisoners or anything else. It isn't, in other words, just they who are improved, but also our quality of relationship to them. If you think about it, that in turn is a metaphor for ecology. Right? I mean, if you can relate to people who in society are ordinarily constricted or crippled by taboo, and you can begin to bring them out into a quality of play and interaction, that's like ecology. That's like not letting parts of nature be destroyed, you know, or be neglected. Yeah.
I was really struck with your comments about the organizational, basically the systems thinking that was going on behind. I don't know anything about chickens. How chickens would actually behave in the wild as opposed to being under, you know, human systems, but how they really are in that one chicken who was attacked by the hawk. The storyteller was saying that, you know, that this chicken had such a desperate need for motherhood that she was trying to encroach on other chicks, which was, you know, and it made me think of the whole "it takes a village" concept and how it works in chickendom. And if chickens actually individuate that much that, you know, we can get along in these confines, but don't come near my chickens, kind of things. And how that's, you know, how all those ones in the big chicken factory, you know, ate in a box that they couldn't even spread their wings. And there's no relationship to these chickens; they're just stuffed in there. What's going on in the system that is their life? And so I was just really curious about, you know, you know, the brain damage that eventually goes on, the psychological impact, as it were, for the chicken. And then going back to, you know, wow, does the chicken even have any awareness of what is going on?
That's the big thing, the awareness thing. Every living thing is consumed all the time or they die, everyone, right? Everything. And it's like mankind has that self-conscious thing, so like we feel guilty before we eat the thing or kill it and eat it, and the bird doesn't think about that, but it pulls the worm out of the ground, right? Like we're way inefficient or something because of that, you know?
One of the themes of, I think it still fits in the humanization of nature, is the theme of the miracle. Like, I think they delayed some time to tell us that the chicken without the head cut off still ate. For a while it appeared that it was functioning with no head and not eating, and representing some sort of miracle. But I think the term miracle was used several times in the rainbow. So this desire for transcendence and in a sense short-circuiting or avoiding the natural system in some way that the chicken with his head cut off represents, but also representing denial and unconsciousness. You know, we're all walking around with our heads cut off, and yet we're functioning.
And a footnote to what you're saying is that Mike the Headless Rooster would not get very far were he not constantly attended and fed by humans. Mike has in effect become a kind of machine when he's put on display. And he has to be maintained. He has to, as it were, be oiled and has to have the eyedropper clear his esophagus in order to stay alive. Just as chickens coming out of the wild have to have been domesticated and they can no longer fight off a hawk. You know, so that from this point of view, the domestication of the food supply is also radically changing the nature of the creatures that we live around, right, and the creatures that we are. I mean, we ourselves would be utterly helpless without an industrial, sophisticated, complex society operating in scale. We fantasize, of course, that fill in the blanks, big government or some other bête noire is the enemy. But in fact, on our own, we would be quite helpless. We depend intensely upon the cultural systems, the social systems that sustain us. None of us. is very good at getting out on the tractor and planting a field, especially starting, this late in the season. We wouldn't have the slightest idea when to grow our crops. So from that point of view, these things are in motion, and the fantasies that somehow we're independent, autonomous, self-contained creatures, that doesn't fly. That's not realistic.